Hello there, and welcome to this edition of Thought for the Week. I've been thinking a great deal about Jesus feeding the multitude there on the northeast shore of the Sea of Galilee, near a village called Bethsaida, which happened to be the home of Philip, Peter, and Andrew. A fascinating village. I often go there with my tour groups, and it's wonderful to walk through those little streets, in amongst the old houses, the ruins of which are still there, and to think Jesus walked these streets and performed mighty miracles. But none was greater than the feeding of the 5,000. It's described in all 4 gospel accounts. All the apostles were riveted by it, and who wouldn't be? To have been in on that would have been to be present at something utterly incredible. And on the edge of the village, there is a slope that leads down to the actual seashore, and biblical Bethsaida was built on top of the hill, but you had the harbour at the bottom of the hill. Now picture the scene. Jesus is there teaching his disciples. Suddenly they're aware of a vast crowd advancing on them from the shore of the sea, where they disembarked in boats. And here they are coming up the slope towards Jesus, expecting to hear something from him, expecting to get something from him. And I can imagine the poor disciples, as Jesus was teaching, they're suddenly aware of this noise behind them, and they turn round, and there are thousands of people advancing on them. Goodness me. And Jesus says, we need to feed them. Well, can you imagine what it was like to see the whites of their eyes? Terrifying. And what's interesting is that in the text of John's Gospel, he gives us a clue as to the timing of the year. He says this in verse 4, Jesus went up on a hillside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. Now John just flicks that little statement into the text, and at first sight you think, well, that's interesting, but no more than that. But actually, it's an amazingly revealing statement. Some people have thought, well, where did these 5,000 people come from? It's an incredible number. Surely this is biblical exaggeration. No, it's not. And when you realize that it was Passover time, it all becomes clear. Now, the area around the Sea of Galilee was densely populated anyway, very different from what many of us think. And scholars believe that there were something like 700,000 people living around the lake. So for 5,000 to come together doesn't seem that unusual in a way. But what is interesting is that the gospel accounts tell us that there were 5,000 men as well as women and children. Well, given the size of families in those days, we could be talking, 20,000 people? Now that's enormous, isn't it? And yet the Lord Jesus was able to perform a miracle to feed all of them. So much so that they were full, and there were 12 baskets of pieces left over after the miracle. Now that is huge. And to my mind, it's hugely encouraging, because no matter how big the challenge, Jesus can be master of the situation if we allow him to be. I think that's quite wonderful. I don't know what you're coping with this week, but maybe there's something looming large in your life and you're wondering, how on earth am I going to cope with this? It's just too big. But maybe your thoughts are going a little further than that even, and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know how the Lord is going to cope with this. It's just too big. Well, I don't think you should worry too much about that. Because if you belong to Jesus, then you can be sure that he's working for you, and that for you, everything is working together to further Jesus' purposes. You be encouraged this week. I certainly am. Bye-bye for now.